Hey, it's Brock here from Rock Hill Farms, and I'm out here today to install a pond aeration system. But before I get started on the install, I just wanted to say a few words about the importance of pond aeration. Growing up in the country, I was always around ponds, mainly these small farm ponds. I had them on my grandpa's property and my uncle's property, and we would go out and fish these little ponds. And some of them looked decently nice, and then some of them were a big mess and just completely covered in algae and just muddy and mucky, and I never gave any thought to that. That's just what a pond was like. But about a year ago, we moved onto this property and it had a pond on it. And I kind of wanted to clean it up, but I didn't know much about it or know how. I just recently did this expansion to the pond. You can see right here is the island that we're leaving, and there's a bridge that we're going to add to it. And eventually I'm going to put a windmill aeration system out on the island. But today we're installing an electric aeration system. The reason an aeration system is important is that these ponds are a small ecosystem, and they rely on beneficial bacteria to break down fish waste or dead and debris plants or anything that might get blown or pushed into the pond. And if that bacteria isn't thriving, then neither is your pond. And that bacteria needs an oxygen-rich environment to do its job. A pond like this that doesn't have water running into it is just stagnant, and it's not going to create that thriving ecosystem that you want. This pond specifically, if you walk out into the older section, you sink into a foot of mud and can hardly even pull your boot out. And I said, why is that mud like that? Is that just, well, some ponds are muddy? And the answer is no, it's really not. That is decaying plant matter and fish waste that didn't properly break down because this pond didn't have any aeration. So today we're gonna fix that. Let's go up and get started setting the pump up. All right, so the pump that I have here is from Koenders Water Solutions. They have a bunch of different aeration systems that you can choose from, and it's not just an aeration system, it's a full pond maintenance system that they teach you. But I got the smallest one they make because I have a small pond, and this one's only rated for water up to 6 foot deep, which is about what mine is. If it's completely full, it could be a little bit higher than that, but we're not going to put it out in the deepest part. And like I said earlier, I'm also going to add a windmill aerator in the future. So let's get this pump set up. You could just set this pump outside and turn it on and go. But they say an ideal location is shaded and partially protected from the weather. But it's important that you don't seal it up too tight where it doesn't get any ventilation and it could overheat in the summer. But we're going into winter, and I'm gonna mount mine in this box right here. This has a pretty wide drip rail, and I'm gonna drill a bunch of good sized holes around it to make sure it's getting plenty of air in. And then I'll put my cord in here and make a drip loop. They mention in the safety section of the manual to put that drip loop so water can't run down your cord and create a short. In addition to that, we're gonna place the pump next to the pool where I already have an outdoor plug-in with a GFCI trip in place. So we'll be fully protected electrically. One thing that a lot of people don't realize, and I definitely didn't realize about electric aerators, is you don't have to run electricity to your pond. I would have ruled out the idea of electric aeration before I talked to Koenders because I didn't want to run electric down there right now. But that's not how it works, really. What I'm gonna do is plug my pump in up here close to the house, and then I'm gonna run the air line all the way down there. And that only requires a small, shallow trench to bury that air line. Okay, so I have this all set up. It didn't take me hardly any time at all. All it cost me was the price of this little plastic tote. And it's not part of the instructions from Koenders, but I thought it would be a good setup for the winter to keep this protected from the elements, but still ventilated. In the summer, I'll probably put it into something that's more open. But let me go ahead and show you real quick what I've got set up here. I drilled 10 of these holes here around the outside to allow air in. On the end, I drilled a hole the same size as the air line, which is a 1/2 inch. I routed the cord through one of my ventilation holes. I set the aerator on this little plastic bin so that if water does get in the tote, the aerator stays dry. I made drip loops with the cord off of the aerator and with the power cable, and then connected them up here so we shouldn't have any problem with water running down that. And then I'll just snap the lid on. That's pretty convenient, easy to move around. Okay, now I'm going to set the aeration unit under the deck here. In the spring, we're completely redoing the pool, and I'll put a new GFCI outdoor outlet right here as a permanent solution for this pump. So for now, I'm going to take this cord to the other side of the pool and get it plugged into that GFCI outlet we have over there. Whenever I plugged that in, it actually started running because we're plugged in inside the box and we're getting airflow. Now we need to route this line down to the pond. As I was researching pond aerators, I came across a video from a YouTube channel called The Northern Farmer, and he has several Koenders units on different ponds, and one of those he mentioned was over 25 years old and still operating. So that's a big selling point for a product. I don't know how long the initial line that comes with the kit was, but I'm thinking it was maybe 100 foot. Clearly that's not going to be enough, and I knew that ahead of time, so I've got some extra line up here. We'll get that and get it hooked up. If I haven't already mentioned this, I'm getting ready to dig drain lines down to the pond, and this is going to be buried in those drain lines. But for now, we're going to get the pump in the water, get it pumping, make sure everything works good. Then in the next few days, I'll have a follow-up video where I dig the trenches and get this set in. Alright, so I've got another roll of the same stuff spread out here. We'll just push these hose barbs in. Those hose barbs are hard to push on. I don't think they're going to come off. But it is important that they're really tight because this is going to be underground and it's going to stay there. And it's under pressure, so it needs to be a tight fit. If you're watching this later in the future and thinking about doing an install like this, read the description and the pinned comment. Because hypothetically, if I do something here that doesn't work or is a mistake or needs changed, I'll put updates there so you have all the information that I can give you. The worst thing as a YouTube content creator is when you put out a video that gives good information, but you put one thing together backward and everyone tells you about it in the comments and you don't have a way to correct that. So I use the pinned comment and the description for those things. That's also where you'll find a link to this aeration setup. Alright, nothing too complicated here, just hose barbs, hose clamps, and it looks like we'll need one more section of this tubing. I put just a little bit of grease on the barb, and it was super easy to slide in after doing that, where I really fought with the last one. I was about to put that on without the hose clamps. Don't want to do that. My neighbor is 78 years old, and it's like 50 degrees and dreary out here. He's over there running his old Ford tractor. I hope that's me someday. I also hope he makes it to about 120, because I don't like having neighbors, and there's only one neighbor that's close enough to see us or for us to see him, and he's been a great guy to talk to. Got a little bit of experience, or a lot of experience, and he can tell me about the history of the property and things like that. This airline should get us all the way down to the pond. Then we'll switch over to the weighted airline and we'll get the air stone set up and get her running. I don't yet know what the final location for this pump is going to be, because the area where the camera is setting is all going to be cut out when this peninsula turns into an island, but I want to wait and get a few more things done out here first. So for right now, I'm going to put the aerator over here where we have a deep spot dug out in the old section of the pond. And I'm gonna put it in a bucket and I'm gonna set it up on a rope where I can retrieve that and move it anytime I need to. So let me get the connections made and I'll be right back. All right, so whenever I got my hard air line down here, I converted it over with the same hose barbs to this soft air line. This is actually a weighted air line. It's what goes in the water and stays at the bottom rather than floating. Then I attached that to the air stone. You could just drop this in the pond, but it would get muddy, especially if it sinks in the mud. It's gonna have trouble pushing air out. So I'm putting this in a 5-gallon bucket, and that will keep the air stone a little bit cleaner. I drilled holes around it about 3/4 of the way up to let water in as the air pushes out the top, and I think that's gonna work pretty well. Then I tied a rope to it, and since we aren't sure this is where this is gonna stay, I'm gonna put the bucket in the water and tie this rope off to a piece of rebar on the bank, and then we can always retrieve it if we need to. So right here is where we dug out for this island, and it's kind of shallow right there. But as we were digging it, we dug this bank out really deep. So we actually have a deep spot just right off this corner. It's also in the existing part of the pond that is dirtier, has the muck in it, and needs aeration worse. So I'm gonna drop the bucket in right there. So for this to sink, I'm gonna have water in it. It's got water in it past the holes. Kind of sinking slowly. Now it's going down right about where I want it. From the bank, I wasn't quite able to get it out where I wanted it. I'm gonna have my son step out here and see if he can push this out a little further. If not, I'll have to get some hip waders, but it's pretty cold today. There you go. Now if it sinks right there, that'll be what we're looking for. All right, jump out of there. It's sunk down far enough that I can't see the top of the bucket, but I can still see where it is, so I'm gonna try to push it down a little bit with the oar from the kayak. All right, so I'm just gonna drive a piece of rebar into the bank right here. All right, so I'm gonna tie off to this. It doesn't really have to be tight, I just want it to stay. All right, so I've got that about 5 or 6 feet from the bank. I'd say the bucket's sitting about 3 or 4 foot to the top of the bucket underwater. So should work pretty good right there, at least for now. Probably pick the warmest day we get in the next month to wade out there and reposition that if it needs it. But let's turn the aerator on and see what happens. We have bubbles. So as I mentioned before, this aerator does several different jobs. Number one, obviously it adds oxygen to the water, which creates more of a healthy ecosystem for your pond. It helps that healthy bacteria thrive. We're going to be adding some more healthy bacteria in a future video. And then the next thing it does is create circulation, which kind of helps pull that muck up off the bottom and just overall balances out the pond better. Within the next few days, weather permitting, we're going to dig a trench and get the rest of this line buried. But that's all for this video. I appreciate you taking time to watch. You should see more of our videos on the screen right here, and I'll see you next time.